Given recent controversies regarding police in the U.S., and debates over sentiments like back the blue versus ACAB, it might seem hard to imagine a time when a law enforcement agent was a widely popular, even beloved figure across America. And yet this was largely the case with, arguably, the most famous real-life crime fighter in American history, Eliot Ness. Ness was only 23 years old when, in 1926, he joined the U.S. Treasury Department's Bureau of Prohibition in Chicago. But he was already an admirable straight shooter, earning enough of a sterling reputation that, when President Herbert Hoover decided to finally take down notorious gangster Al Capone in 1930, a now 27-year-old Ness was chosen by the Justice Department to head a small group of special agents tasked with investigating, harassing, and eventually arresting Capone. Knowing how widespread corruption was in Chicago, Ness carefully chose a team of 6 men he felt were extremely trustworthy and unbribable. And, sure enough, their incorruptible nature would soon find them dubbed the Untouchables by the press. Ness and his Untouchables launched frequent raids on illegal breweries, speakeasies, and other bootlegging operations, ultimately costing Capone's organization a total of $9 million in lost revenue, and, more importantly, helped secure the evidence that would eventually send Capone to prison on charges of income tax evasion. Even if Prohibition wasn't exactly popular with everyone, the well-reported actions of the Untouchables, particularly Capone's indictment, made Ness a national hero. As a reward, he was made the chief investigator of the Prohibition Bureau. But when Prohibition ended in 1933, he was transferred to Cleveland, Ohio, where he was made that city's safety director. This stage of Ness's career is less remembered by history, perhaps for good reason. His popularity began to dwindle as critics in the press targeted his divorce, his penchant for heavy social drinking, and his conduct following a drunk driving accident. But Ness really lost favor with the public when, during the serial killing spree of 1935 to 1938 known as the Cleveland Torso Murders, Ness ordered the city's numerous shantytowns forcibly evacuated and burned to the ground. Not only did this not stop the murders as Ness had hoped, in fact the case would never be solved, but this treatment of the city's homeless population was considered especially heartless by the public at large. In the years that followed, Ness would go through a second divorce and third marriage, and run an unsuccessful campaign for Cleveland mayor. He would also continue to drink, a lot. By the time he died in 1957, at the age of 54, he was nearly penniless, his days as a national hero long behind him. But what Ness couldn't have known at the time of his death was that his legacy would eventually be largely redeemed, and he would once again become a legendary, popular icon, thanks in part to The Untouchables, a 1959 TV series based on Ness's autobiographical memoir, co-written with Oscar Frehley, which had been published shortly after Ness's death. The series, which sensationally dramatized the team's battles with Capone's criminal empire, starred Robert Stack as Ness, and was a giant hit, running for 4 seasons on ABC. In 1987, Brian De Palma would make a wildly successful film of Ness's book, once again titled The Untouchables, starring Kevin Costner as Ness. What is less remembered, however, is that in 1993, there was a second, less successful television reboot of The Untouchables, which starred Tom Amandes as Ness, and ran for 2 seasons in syndication, but is largely forgotten today. Perhaps the most notable factoid about that version of The Untouchables is that its Al Capone was played by popular character actor William Forsythe, who just a few years earlier had played the main criminal henchman in another movie that could arguably be traced back to Ness. Because, besides the success of the various Untouchables projects, another part of Ness's enduring pop culture legacy and status as a famous real-life crime fighter is that he was the inspiration for a popular comic strip hero who would go on to become one of fiction's most famous crime fighters. The year is 1990, and Walt Disney, through their Touchstone Pictures division, is ready to indulge a Hollywood legend's desire to launch the next big comic-inspired action franchise with Dick Tracy.
0.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And we're here to discuss... Wait. Hey, here, you read this.
La La Land.
La La Land has 14 Oscar nominations this year.
Guys, I'm sorry. No, there's been a mistake. There's a mistake. This is the Dick Tracy episode.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, call off the celebration, everyone. Sorry.
Imagine if La La Land was meant to
start a franchise. La La Land Resurrections.
Yeah.
I honestly, I wouldn't put it past. I bet you at some point there was like a Hollywood meeting of being like, La La Land 2, guys? There's no way it didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's why he made Babylon.
Yeah. No, this, as Chris just mentioned, this is looking at 1990s Dick Tracy, and there's a particular reason for that. This is the start of a new theme. We love our themes. This is a multi-month theme. And Chris, as you know, this is a theme that I've been like asking for and excited for since we started this podcast. I think it's like one of the early ones I brought up to you about like, I really want to cluster these movies together. And this is, so we're starting a 2-month theme called Pulp Frustration. Oh, now see, I know you're all thinking, oh, are these like Tarantino ripoffs? No. We're being even more clever with our title. Pulp Frustration, as evidenced by Dick Tracy being the first movie, is going to be a look at 4 movies, all from the 90s, that are based on pulp characters. And, we'll talk a little bit more about like what pulp means as we go along, but I'm guessing the listeners of our show kind of get a sense of what that means. The old kind of hard-boiled pulp heroes. And it is true that in the 90s in particular, there was like a run of these. Suddenly, a lot of studios were putting out movies featuring these kind of pulp heroes. And there's a very particular reason for that, Chris. And I don't know if like in your research on this one, because I know these are all first-time watches for you. You're not as familiar with this whole trend as I was, kind of growing up during it. But there was a definite reason for this, and I don't know if you saw it, but that reason can be boiled down to a particular movie that came out in 1989. Do you know what movie I'm talking about?
Yes, of course. Of course we're talking about Tim Burton's Batman.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
Yes, Batman was a cultural sensation, just a gigantic blockbuster. As someone who like lived through it, it's still like really tough to explain to people how big of a deal Batman was. Because you like bring it up and they're like, well, no, I've lived through big blockbusters. I've lived through Avatar and Endgame and Star Wars. And it's like, yeah, but you weren't there. You weren't there for like how gigantic, like the hype was on Batman and just that symbol everywhere. I've always told people, I remember going to see it in the theater as a young kid. And it's the only time I've ever gone to the theater and they oversold the theater and people were just sitting on the floor in the aisles for our screening. But yeah, so Batman was a gigantic hit in 1989. And what that meant was that suddenly every studio was like, well, we need our own Batman. We need something like Batman. We need a Batman movie. And the obvious answer might have been, well, let's plunder the other Marvel and DC characters. But a lot of things prevented that. So on one hand, first of all, even though Batman was like a gigantic success, it was still true, and we see this in some of the other comic book adaptations through the 90s, that Hollywood wasn't entirely sold on comic book characters yet.
Right.
Like, I think they looked at Batman as like a fluke. Superman had done well in the 70s, but then the later Superman sequels, it all started to like kind of dive off, and eventually that franchise crashed and burned with Superman 4. And so Batman comes along, it's a huge hit, but they're like, I don't know, that might be a fluke. But we want something like Batman, but I don't know if we want to go into these other comic characters. And I think it's also true that even if they did want to, the rights to like a lot of the Marvel characters, especially, were kind of nebulous at that point. Often like different studios, it was kind of a more logistical nightmare. And Warner Brothers, as we know and we've talked about a lot, for whatever reason, it took them a long time to realize that as the partners and owners eventually of DC, they could have always been like going into their other characters. That took them like a long time to figure out.
Yeah.
So we didn't get like, surprisingly enough, after Batman, we didn't get a run of like a lot of big profile, like, high profile, big budget, good comic book movies. Definitely there were comic book movies in the 90s, but remember I said good ones. But what the studios did say is, well, we want something like that. And they realized that, oh, you know what is probably like cheaper for us to get is the rights to these old pulp heroes. And in some of the cases that made sense, because at least one of the characters we're looking at coming up a little later was like a direct inspiration for Batman, so they could see like how, a lot of these could be made into movies like Batman. So yes, through the 90s, and we're going to look at 4 of them, we got this like string of, movies that were, I don't want to say Dick Tracy is so, because we're going to talk about the development history of Dick Tracy, which actually far preceded Batman.
Yeah.
And yet, there's definitely elements of Dick Tracy that you can look at and say, well, that was definitely influenced by Batman. And that set this whole like 90s pulp thing in motion. And starting with this one today, 1990s Dick Tracy. So now that I've got that preamble out of the way, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
This one is directed by Warren Beatty, legendary Bonnie and Clyde actor. He's directed films like Heaven Can Wait, Reds, Bulworth. He's just a mega Hollywood movie star. He's one of the classic movie stars of our time. The film is written by Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr., most famous for Top Gun, Turner and Hooch, Anaconda, and Flintstones and Viva Rock Vegas. So it's been a little bit of a dip.
Yeah, and to be fair, they're the credited writers.
Correct. Yes. This is based on the comic strip by Chester Gould, distributed by Tribune Media Services. The budget of this film is $46 million. Domestically, it made $103 million, and worldwide, it made $162.7 million. Now, Trev, we're going to get back to Hollywood accounting later. But by those numbers, you'd think this is a huge hit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
from 46 million to 162. Yeah, that's a pretty big profit there.
Big time. So we're going to come back to that a little later and explain some financials.
Let's just say it now, Chris. Like, let's just tease it a little bit, because this is not only a movie that was considered, despite what we just said, like we said, we'll get back to it. This is not only a movie that was considered ultimately a financial failure, but a movie that changed the entire way Disney did business moving forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Before we get into the film proper and the development, I don't want to say hell, but there's a lot to talk about. Maybe let's give the common folk, as they say, a history lesson on who
the plebeians, as I like to call them,
the proletariat, as they say. Who is Dick Tracy, and why? Why did we want to make a movie about Dick Tracy in 1990, other than the Batman way of thinking?
Yeah, well, I was 10 years old in 1990. I didn't want to make a Dick Tracy movie. Don't put this on me.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be a median age of 65 at that point to want a Dick Tracy movie.
So why did other people want to make a Dick Tracy movie? And in fact, as you alluded to, why even before 1990 were so many people for so long trying to make a Dick Tracy movie?
So Dick Tracy was actually first published on October 4th, 1931, Trev. Chester Gould modeled this character after U.S. federal agent Elliot Ness, the famous U.S. Marshal that took down Al Capone. I do like the original name for Dick Tracy, by the way, Plain Clothes Tracy.
Yeah.
What do you think is better?
I think Dick Tracy is better because it allows us to make so many dick jokes.
Exactly. I love a euphemism. Yeah. Big fan of those.
Yeah.
So at the time, this actually was a pretty big hit. In the mid 30s, there was a poll of adult comic readers being like, "Who's your favorite?" And Dick Tracy came in third across all the strips in the States, right after Little Orphan Annie and Popeye. That really tells you how far back we're going, by the way. Okay, just naming those names, right? We're way away from Batman and Superman here. But the comic strip took different channels and different avenues throughout time, obviously. It started out as Tracy joining the police after his girlfriend's father was murdered by robbers, and he kind of was just one of those, simple detective stories, Dick Tracy versus the mob. That's basically what it came down to. A lot of the villains were larger than life, silly. They were drawn particularly weird, and basically, we'll get to it later if that translated to the film. But there was definitely a distinct style to Dick Tracy. Yeah. It was a style of its own, for sure.
It's something that I don't think Dick Tracy, like the character in the comic strip, gets enough credit for. Is like the idea and the development of a rogues gallery.
Yes.
Like, obviously, some comic book superheroes were already developing that, but I think a lot of that was also pulled in from, Dick Tracy at the time, because Dick Tracy had all these different criminals he would face, and even though they were all just kind of, robbers and mobsters, they were still all, they had a particular name, they had a particular look. It was kind of always set to, all the good people in Dick Tracy look like normal people, and then all the criminals look like hideous monsters, essentially.
Like mutants.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my favorite is that they never really had origin stories.
No.
Dick Tracy just kind of happened, right? You enter this world, and he's just the guy on the case, right? Taking down the mob of colorful creatures, really. So the strip goes into the 1940s, and in this time, there's kind of a retro-futurism vibe that's happening, and I guess, maybe retro isn't the word back then, but maybe a futurism vibe, let's just say, and it kind of paved the way for modern tech. Now, Myself, as Trev kind of alluded to on previous episodes, I honestly am not familiar with Dick Tracy. It's really just name only. I've seen little clips here and there. I know what the character looks like, the iconic yellow trench coat and yellow hat. Like, I get it to some extent. But one thing I did always know was this kind of was the advent of the radio wristwatch. So Dick Tracy's main form of communication with the police force is this little wristwatch that he could talk two-way communication from. And it's kind of crazy that this did inspire Martin Cooper's invention of the mobile phone. Yeah. And it really may have inspired actual smartwatches of our time today. So I've always known that part. Dick Tracy, the inventor of the wristwatch that you can talk through, you know? So
that's right. Every time you text somebody, you have Dick Tracy to thank, folks.
100%.
Just think about that.
So the strip then moves into the 1950s, and this one becomes a little bit more topical. It becomes a little bit more, or I guess a little bit less about gangsters and mobsters, but more about, you know, family life, home life, crises of juvenile delinquency, kind of like a soap opera, to be honest. It focuses on Dick Tracy's home life and his family. This wasn't received super well, so they quickly changed pace in the 1960s to the space period. Now, Trev, I mean, fucking every media thing ever in the 60s became space, space, space. Am I correct? Like, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Dick Tracy wasn't really leading the charge here. Everything was doing it, but it's funny to think that, you know, a couple decades earlier, this guy taking on the mob all of a sudden went to adventures on the moon. It just kind of, it's hilarious. It's hilarious. From the space period now in the 60s, we move to the 70s. And here we got the hippie era, obviously. And again, didn't really lead the charge, but everything was moving more hippy-dippy. Tracy was modernized. He had longer hair. He had a mustache. He also had a hippie sidekick called Groovy Grove. I liked that a lot. That was to appeal to the younger audience. And then Chester Gould retired from comics in 1977. So this is when it was taken over by a whole new writing crew, some bit of a protege thing going on, and Dick Tracy kind of, you know, honestly went back to basics. A less cynical worldview, more about just more, again, simpler, I guess, maybe is the right thing, right? It went back to that 1930s, 1940s atmosphere about a guy taking on the mob.
Well, for sure, because like one of the proteges that took it over was Max Allan Collins, who I'm a really big fan of. He's like, he's a modern writer still going today. But the thing is, he was really a guy who was brought up on the old pulp authors, you know, right. Like the, especially Mickey Spillane. He was kind of a protege of him as well. And he still today writes the new Mike Hammer books, which is the Mickey Spillane character. So he really loves and still writes in that old hard-boiled detective film noir pulp style. So you can just sense that he wanted to take Dick Tracy back to that. And that's pretty much, he's not still the writer. He did it for really quite a while, but it's like been passed on to other writers. Dick Tracy is still running today. I don't know how many newspapers carry it, but you can go online and read a new Dick Tracy strip every day on like its own website. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting to like go through that history as you just did and think about how for a while it really was a strip that was kind of always reflecting what was going on in culture for like a while. And then suddenly once Max Allan Collins and Gould's assistant Rick Fletcher took over after he retired, they were like, no, let's just take it back to the basics. And that's pretty much been locked into that ever since. And I think the reason for that is because at that point, like once you get into like, you know, the late 70s and on, people want Dick Tracy to only exist as like nostalgia homage to itself essentially and to its original time period. You know, it's not like people aren't looking to read Dick Tracy takes on MAGA or anything. They want the Dick Tracy adventures to be like a fun throwback to the old, like, you know, pulp noir days of the 30s and 40s.
Which is honestly what we're seeing a lot nowadays anyways. You know, like it is just nostalgia bait. It's a little bit simpler times. I think I had a friend say this to me recently that, you know, life is so fucking weird right now. And the political landscape is so fractured that I think just people do want that escape.
There's also a thing of like, you know, like the comfort of reading stories where, in this world, the cops are actually decent, good people. The cops are right, and the bad guys are clearly bad guys. There's no question. Right. You're not like wondering if this like billionaire who says they're trying to fix the world is actually evil. He's evil because he's got like a giant horn and he's called Hornhead, and no, that guy's bad. I get it.
Yeah, there's no character like Flat Top that was created because somebody was kneeling on his head, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Now I gotta mention too, like I said, I'm not super aware of Dick Tracy other than kind of name recognition, but Trev, holy shit, this property, this IP, this character, again, has been around since the 30s, but in like all of the forms of all media at all times. Toys, playsets, merch, t-shirts, video games, comic books, filmography of like serials of from the 1930s to the 40s, radio shows from 1934 to 1948, television specials, different people playing the character, TV pilots. It's been like, honestly, Dick Tracy's been everywhere.
There was a Dick Tracy like a weekly cartoon in the 60s, the early 60s.
Yeah. Like how did I miss this? I mean, did you miss a lot of this too? Like, I know you're familiar with the film, but
yeah. I mean, I did, because the thing is that what is interesting is this is definitely one of those characters that you look at, and it had a very long, like, and probably longer than people today would think, a very long moment in the sun. A moment where Dick Tracy was definitely a big part of the zeitgeist, but that moment didn't last forever. So it is true that for a long time, as you point out, it had, it started as a radio program, or it started as a comic strip, but then went into radio, then to TV, then to movies, and then to cartoons. But that all kind of stops in the 70s. It doesn't really make it. It doesn't make it out of the 70s, and even beyond, it doesn't really make it out of the early 70s. That's like the earliest stuff you'll see, where there was some Dick Tracy like segments in like Archie cartoons. But it doesn't really make it much past that. So it's Dick Tracy, his cultural zeitgeist moment was really the 30s through the 60s, and then after that it really kind of peters out.
The early 70s really was when this all stalled, because Warren Beatty had a concept for a Dick Tracy film in 1975. Now, this is when we start talking about the rights to Dick Tracy. So development of this film started right then. Mid 70s on. And like I said, this movie comes out in 1990. So we got a good decade plus of history to cover here. First off, the film is assigned to writer Tom Mankiewicz. Longtime Bond fans will know his name. He was kind of the leader of 1970s Bond in the writing stage.
But also for the purposes here, probably more specifically, he was also the writer of Superman and Superman 2.
Exactly. Now, at this point in time, the film rights are owned by Michael Laughlin. He actually gave up his option from Tribune Media Services, the original distributors of the comic strip, after he was unsuccessful at pitching a movie to Hollywood. This then goes through Floyd Mutrux and Art Linson. Do those names mean anything to you?
Nope.
Okay. They purchased the film rights from Tribune in 1977, and in 1980, United Artists becomes interested in financing and distributing a Dick Tracy film. Again, this is where Tom Mankiewicz comes in. The deal falls through because Chester Gould, the creator of the comic strip, is insistent on strict financial and artistic control, which is hilarious once we tell you the rest of who finally gets the film rights. This then goes to Paramount Pictures. Steven Spielberg is going to direct it. John Landis is going to direct it.
And I think it's important to mention, too, because this comes up later, that right here, when you said it's 1980 and it's brought to Paramount, and the people, the two executives at Paramount at this time who, get Landis involved and just start really pursuing the idea of a Dick Tracy movie are Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner.
Yes.
Keep that in mind, because that's important, because those two are at Paramount at this point, and they bring it over and they say, let's do Dick Tracy, and they set this all up. And just keep those names in mind, because they might circle back around here.
With John Landis in the director's chair, they court Clint Eastwood to be a part of this. They do start courting Warren Beatty, by the way, but also names that are being flung around. Harrison Ford, Richard Gere, Tom Selleck, Mel Gibson. There's definitely a type that they're going for here. Kind of a hard-nosed, detective, right? Landis eventually leaves Dick Tracy because, well, he killed some people. Filming The Twilight Zone. We talked a little bit about that in our Karate Kid episode about stunts and how they can go wrong.
Hey listeners, a quick drop in here. I meant to say we talk about stunts and what could go wrong in Robin Hood 2018, part of our New Year's Robin Lucians theme month. So in addition to the Karate Kid episode, which is awesome, check out that one as well. Thanks.
So Landis is quickly shuffled to the side, and we court Walter Hill.
I know.
Now,
Walter Hill and Joel Silver coming off of, what were they coming off of, Chris? Because this is...
Oh, they're coming off Streets of Fire, baby.
Yeah.
And that's a movie that we covered as well that I had not seen before. Spoiler alert, I loved it. Go listen to that discussion because it's just such an entertaining one. Such a good one.
Just everything about Walter Hill's filmography, and then especially coming off of Streets of Fire, you hear that and you go like, oh yeah, of course. Like, yes. Walter Hill, Dick Tracy, that's like a match made in heaven.
Yes. So at this point now, Beatty is going to be Dick Tracy. But now there's a little bit of control issues that arise with Warren Beatty and Walter Hill. Walter Hill wants to make a film that's more violent and realistic, and, Warren Beatty wants to make a more of a stylized homage to the old serial, comic strip. Mm-hmm. And he also wants a fuck ton of money, okay? He wants $5 million plus 15% of the gross. Universal says, absolutely not. Everybody leaves the film. And basically, this everything stops. The rights revert back to Tribune Media Services in 1985, and Beatty loves this character, wants to do the film, and this is kind of a thing that doesn't happen anymore. Trev, this is something that a studio would do, but in this case, in 1985, you have a major Hollywood icon front the cash for the rights to Dick Tracy. So Warren Beatty puts up $3 million of his own money, and now he owns the rights to Dick Tracy.
Yeah, the cinematic rights, yeah. And like you said, he's been very public about how he said that he learned to read as a boy, like using the Dick Tracy comic strips. So this was like a character that had meant something to him for a long time. As you said, he was already telling people about an idea about this like 10 years ago at this point in 75. So when he swoops in and uses all of the clout and money he's built to this point, well, not all of it, but a significant amount of it to purchase the rights to Dick Tracy. Because now he's saying, he's already looked at, for his purposes, 10 years of development hell on this. And he says, forget it, I'll just do it myself.
Yeah. Now, Trev mentioned that Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner are major players. At this point in time, they are gone from Paramount, and now they are running Walt Disney Studios.
Yeah, of course, Eisner, is the man in charge. Katzenberg is the one right underneath him. There'll be some drama with that later, but maybe we'll cover that some other day. But what's important to know is at this point in 85, Disney is not the Disney of today. They're really struggling. They're trying to get their feet back under them after a string of kind of, high-profile failures, and, they're just getting beat by every other studio. Significantly, every other studio seems to have, like, a big franchise, and at this point, Disney doesn't. And so they see Dick Tracy as maybe the opportunity to, get their own franchise, especially with a big star like Warren Beatty attached. And they're also kind of, at this point, Disney is very willing to bring in, kind of prestigious filmmakers and let them do what they want because they're just so desperate for a hit. Mm-hmm. So they kind of swoop in and work with Beatty and say, you have the rights. Well, we'll put it out through Disney and we'll help you. And at first, Warren Beatty is not intending to direct this. He wants to star as Dick Tracy, but he doesn't want to direct it. So he actually courts and it's briefly announced in Variety even that Martin Scorsese is going to direct Dick Tracy.
Comic book movie hater Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, kind of a mind-blowing concept to think about, like what that would have been, if I want to see that even more than I want to see Walter Hill's Dick Tracy, definitely. Obviously, but Martin Scorsese does not stay involved very long. He kind of quickly takes his name out of the running, and Beatty, still looking to kind of avoid having to direct it, I think, starts just courting other directors. He talks to Hal Ashby, he talks to Sam Raimi, he talks to Brian De Palma, the Coen brothers. And just, I don't know, I'm guessing, based on everything I know about Warren Beatty, I'm guessing the sticking point on all of these conversations is Warren Beatty.
The dicking point?
The dicking point, yeah. But I'm guessing it's Warren Beatty himself. because Warren Beatty is, and we're going to talk more about him obviously throughout this episode. But for those who don't know, I'm guessing, as you said, most people know his name. They know him as an icon. He's also known as something of a gigantic control freak, like just one of the ultimate, like a perfectionist. And that's why, it's interesting because he's such a big icon. And yet if you look at his filmography, he did not make many movies throughout his career. And that's because every time he got involved with the movie, he wanted to like really make sure it was right. He wasn't putting himself out there to take like big risks that often. He was like calculating everything down. So it would take him forever to make a movie. Mm-hmm. He put like so much effort into each movie. So I guess all these directors probably met with him, and probably just like during the meeting, I'm guessing they all walked away thinking he should just direct it himself. Yes. He's never going to let me direct it the way I want to. And so sure enough, at a certain point, Warren Beatty finally just says, okay, forget it. I'll just direct it myself. And Disney is like, okay, great. Like, because at this point, he's coming off of Reds, which he won the Academy Award for Best Director. So it actually is kind of looked at as a coup for Disney to say, yeah, Warren Beatty is going to direct our Dick Tracy movie. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, Disney was at least aware. As you said, he's got a reputation. Disney actually quotes saying he has a reputation for directorial wastefulness. So Beatty's fee is $7 million against 15% of the gross. Okay, once it reaches $50 million. Now, this is all under the condition that Warren Beatty keeps the budget within $25 million. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to Hollywood accounting and what they don't ever want to tell the trades. So I have a quote here. Costs began to rise once filming started and quickly jumped to $30 million. And its total negative cost ended up being $46.5 million, which was equal to $35.6 million of direct expenditure, $5.3 million in studio overhead, and $5.6 million in interest. Disney then spent an additional $48.1 million on advertising and publicity and $5.8 million on prints, resulting in a total of $101 million spent overall. And this is 1989 money. Mm-hmm. Okay. So when we said that this was a financial success, yeah, to the person who doesn't look past, the title of the article, because this was a pretty big failure on the books for Disney. And what Trev has said before completely changed the way Disney does business going forward.
Yeah, after this, like, there's actually a memo that comes out in Disney, like, following the, like I said, it's hard. This is so weird because I was going to say following the failure of this movie, but as you just mentioned, it's really strange to categorize this movie as a failure because if you just look at box office gross, that's a pretty high box office gross for that time period. It also goes on to win 3 Academy Awards.
Right.
It is nominated for even more. It's fairly well critically received. People do like it. It's more liked than it's not at the time. I think that's safe to say. And but like you said, because Beatty got a little out of control with the making of it, Disney doesn't see the profits they want to see. So they eventually sent out a memo saying, we can't make movies like that anymore. We can't get in bed with these kind of auteurs, these filmmakers who wanted to make these passion projects. We can't give them unlimited budgets because even if the movie does well, it doesn't matter to us because it doesn't do well enough to make up for what they spent on the movie. Right. So Disney gets out of the auteur business after this, which, boy, don't we know that today.
Yes, unfortunate. Yeah. Are you crediting Warren Beatty with the Russo brothers?
Yeah, you know what? Sorry, Warren Beatty. You gotta come and accept some responsibility for this. Without Warren Beatty, we might have Peyton Reed running wild out here.
Oh my God! Yes. Auteur Peyton Reed.
And I know we're about to go into the film, but there's one last thing I think we should mention with the development of it, because you mentioned that the script, the credited writers on this are Jim Cash and Jack Epps Jr. And they came out and wrote their version of the script back during that initial period when Paramount bought it and Spielberg was briefly involved and then John Landis. That script really held on. Like, Warren Beatty was a fan of that script, and when he bought the rights, he brought that script with him. However, because as we said, he's a control freak, he also heavily rewrites it with a regular collaborator of his named Bo Goldman. That's why I mentioned earlier, like, I wanted to point out that those two guys are the credited writers, but really what we see on screen is Beatty and Goldman's rewrite. But Beatty and Goldman end up losing a Writers Guild arbitration, and they didn't receive any screen credit. But it's pretty widely known that they took the bare bones of what the other two writers did and then really kind of did their own thing with it.
Right.
But anyways, let's stop dicking around and let's talk about the movie.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's go.
Big Boy Caprice, Breathless Mahoney, Flat Top, the DA, Prune Face, Mumbles, Lips Manless, and the Blank are out to get the greatest detective of all time.
I'm rubbing him out.
I want him dead.
Nobody touches Tracy but me.
Tracy.
Tracy?
You mind if I call you Dick?
I was beginning to wonder what a girl had to do to get arrested.
Wearing that dress is a step in the right direction.
For a tough guy, you do a lot of pansy things.
Extra! Tracy battles move!
Everywhere I turn. Tracy.
You're under arrest.
Aren't you gonna frisk me?
Hey, copper, maybe you ought to look before you leap.
When it's time to fight crime, he's your man. Walt Disney Pictures presents Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy.
Whose side are you on?
And Madonna as Breathless Mahoney.
Are you gonna make a move? Do I have to do everything?
I'm on duty.
Dick Tracy.
I'm on my way.
Hard-boiled detective Dick Tracy is gathering evidence that proves Alphonse Big Boy Caprice is the city's most dangerous crime boss. Tracy may have found the key to unraveling the crime lord's illegal empire in Breathless Mahoney, a seductive singer who has witnessed some of Caprice's worst crimes firsthand. However, she seems more set on stealing Tracy away from his longtime girlfriend, Tess Trueheart, than helping him solve the case of his career. And to top it off, a nameless orphan has fallen under Tracy's supervision. Can Dick Tracy overcome all obstacles and save the city from being riddled with crime? Well, I mean, probably, because Warren Beatty might sue us if he doesn't.
Yep, Dick Tracy. Chris, you and I typically don't share our thoughts with each other about the movie. We want to go in kind of blind, but I think it's safe to say that I'm pretty sure just through osmosis, you more or less know how I feel about this film. However, this was your first time watch, so I'm very, very interested. So why don't you go first and tell me what you thought of experiencing Dick for the first time?
Well, you are definitely more experienced with Dick than I am. So I get it. But this time around for me, I really, really enjoyed Dick Tracy.
Okay.
Yeah. This movie's awesome. I think I loved it. I think I'll say that. I'm not even gonna bury the lead. I think I loved it. I went into this fairly blind, as I've said before. I went in ready for it to wash all over me. For Dick to wash all over my face. I went into it. And this has such an otherworldly feel right away. It's surreal. The visuals pop like comic pop art, just right off the screen. I love the pulpy 1950s retrofuturism. Dude, this is Speed Racer mixed with Streets of Fire, mixed with Batman 89. And those three movies are bangers. This is awesome. The heightened retro feel, the matte paintings, obviously the visuals are such a huge part of why I liked it. You know me, I'm a simple man with simple tastes. But Dick Tracy is a simple movie. And I think that's a good thing. This is one of those times where style over substance works. And for somebody like me and you, we've done Speed Racer in the past as well, by the way, listener. Go listen to that one, because Speed Racer, to me, is a fucking masterpiece. And this one has all the artistry and earnest tone that I think Speed Racer perfected. This paved the way for that movie. I would love to sit down and talk to the Wachowskis and ask, how much of a fan they are of this film, because they have to be. I want to talk about more, but yeah, dude, loved it. I was so happy watching it. I really was. I was very excited to talk about it today. I think, I'll let you go, and then we'll get into details, because I want to talk about performances and stuff too. But yeah, go ahead. I don't want to be too giddy.
No, that's great, because I've been a fan of this movie for a very, very long time, since I saw it in the theater as a young kid.
Cool.
Like I said, the hype that they built on this worked for me. So I alluded to that earlier, and I just want to kind of briefly say what I meant by that. As you said, the development period of this movie preceded Batman, But the way they marketed this movie was very, very heavily influenced by Batman. You could tell because, the way they marketed Batman in '89 was they just had that bat symbol everywhere, right? It was just that simple bat symbol poster, giant billboards of it at the theater. Every poster marquee was that. And then so they did something very similar the next year where Dick Tracy, they created this like really iconic, logo for it, which is just kind of like Dick Tracy in silhouette with the yellow hat, and it looks very, very similar. And they started plastering that everywhere. There's definitely things about, the Batman influence that's felt. Warren Beatty hires Danny Elfman to do the score. Mm-hmm. And you listen to the score, and even though it doesn't have a theme as like recognizable or like iconic as the Batman theme, you still listen to that score and you feel like that's just Danny Elfman going like, all right, here's like someone said, like, Elfman, can you give us like a Batman, number 3 or something? And he's like, yeah, okay, I can do that. It's a very Batman-esque score. So like as a young kid who was already coming off the high of Batman the year before, I was so ready to roll into another movie like that.
Right.
And I think what's very interesting is, as a kid, I realized I saw Dick Tracy, I was either 9 or 10. Let me see, when did it come out exactly? It came out in June. Yeah, so I was 9 when I saw this movie. And as a 9-year-old, I didn't know anything about like the old pulps, or like old film noir. I wasn't watching those yet. So I was really just taken by everything you just mentioned, like the colors, the outrageousness of the villains, just like how kind of simple the storytelling was. And this is a movie that, as I've revisited over the decades, I appreciate it even more now, because now I'm also really into old film noir and really into reading the old pulp stories. And so it speaks to me on a completely different level. And I also love that it's a crazy director passion project. Yeah. And like, we're going to talk about that too. This is the kind of movie that doesn't happen enough in Hollywood. Now, yes, we know that was not that wasn't great for Disney. It didn't benefit them in a big way. But you look at the trajectory of it, and like, just for my purposes of how well the film turned out, I said that I really would have liked to see Walter Hill's Dick Tracy, and I would have liked to have seen Martin Scorsese's Dick Tracy. That's true. It's still true. But then I think about how Walter Hill wanted to make this more serious, and I bet Scorsese would as well. And I have to say, I think Warren Beatty was right. Yep. From the very beginning. I think Warren Beatty had the right idea of saying, no, it's Dick Tracy. Let's make a simple, colorful, pulpy, campy comic book movie. Mm-hmm. And it's the only kind of movie that Warren Beatty ever did that's like that exactly. But man, did he nail it. Nailed the tone. And I love it for all those reasons. I love that it's like an homage to an old kind of filmmaking and look and tone that I love. But I also love that it's this, megalomaniacal director who's just going like, I don't care what anyone says, I'm doing this. And it's like super earnest. He's not trying to make a cool, badass movie. He's just trying to make the best version of the comic strip possible and put it on screen. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally prefer an earnest goofiness to make it like a live action cartoon versus, the dark, broody, take me serious version. I think this really, really works. Really quick, I want to go back to what you were talking about with Danny Elfman doing the score. As longtime listeners know, and newcomers will find out right now, me and Trev are score whores. We are big-time score whores. And Danny Elfman, he has a couple great quotes here talking about working on this film. He says, directors don't know anything about music, really. And if they do, it's not necessarily a help. Warren Beatty is a pianist. And knows much. Good thing. Well, that's why he liked Dick Tracy. He's a pianist. You get it? And knows much more about music than almost any director. But when he and I started on Dick Tracy, communicating on a musical level was getting us nowhere because it's all so interpretive. We started having much more success when we started talking on a strictly gut level. He also goes on to say, in a completely different way, Dick Tracy has this unique quality that Batman had for me. It gives an incredible sense of non-reality. Yeah. I loved that quote because in the first minute of this movie, that's what you feel. Mm-hmm. You are in another place, another time, another world, and you're not like, how I said it was like a retro futurism, like 1950s-ish. That's what I mean by ish. It could be any time because it's no time. It's such a different spot, and I loved how it is kind of a timeless film in that sense, right?
You know what it reminds me of is Batman the Animated Series.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, like that look and that kind of world. And yeah, I still remember to this day seeing this in the theater as a boy, and in the first few minutes, like in the first act, we meet the kid who is the young orphan who will become like the son surrogate to Dick Tracy.
Sure.
And he basically he steals a guy's watch and runs out of a diner, and Dick Tracy chases him. And we find out that the kid works for this character called Steve the Tramp. Steve the Tramp is this disgusting homeless guy who uses the kid to go get him goods to come back that he can fence and get money for. And he lives in this shack next to the railroad. And Dick Tracy chases the kid there and goes in and sees the tramp hit the kid. And so Dick Tracy basically does the old, why don't you take on someone your own size? And he starts fighting the tramp. And you cut to an outside shot. And like you said, all the backgrounds in this movie are these really not realistic matte paintings, but you can tell Warren Beatty doesn't want them to look realistic. He wants everything to look heightened.
Yep.
But then as they're fighting, the shack starts moving back and forth. And I remember that was the moment as a kid where I was like, this rules. I just fell in love with it right there because I'd never seen anything like that. So yeah, that idea of this doesn't exist in reality, but it exists in this movie's reality. And you never question it. Everything makes sense. Everything feels real to this world.
Yeah, and the exaggeration of the visuals is really what draws you in. That is a key moment that I wrote in my notes, is when that little shack goes back and forth. It's so good. And again, we talked about this with the comic strip, with these names of mobsters, right? And their names equal what they kind of look like. So they come off as monsters or little just mutations, but it's all taken so seriously. Here's some of the examples. Flat Top. His head is just flat on top, but it's a gigantic head. There's a guy named Lips. His lips are big and disgusting. There's a guy named Small Face, which I wish was in the movie a little bit more. He has a gigantic head, but his face is itty bitty in the middle of it. There's a guy named Mumbles, played by Dustin Hoffman. We got to come back to that in a second. Where all he does, he's deformed enough to just mumble all of his lines. And then there's a guy named Prune Face, where he just has all these wrinkles. He's just disgusting looking. And everybody takes it so seriously. And I fucking love that for it.
I mean, yeah, that has to do with the fact that these aren't just any regular schmoes playing these parts either. Again, you talk about Warren Beatty taking this very seriously and wanting to use the clout he's established and make a real movie, even though he's making a goofy, campy movie. He made sure to get real good classic Hollywood actors to play all these parts. So, these are pretty heavy hitters playing our villains here. I mean, you mentioned, there's one named Influence, who's played by the great Henry Silva. Lips Manless, played by Paul Sorvino, who of course we all remember as Worf's dad on Star Trek: The Next Generation. He's also in Goodfellas, whatever. But yeah, you mentioned Dustin Hoffman.
Taught me how to cut garlic, just saying.
Dustin Hoffman as Mumbles. We got the great William Forsythe, one of my favorite character actors, as Flat Top. And of course, we have to talk about one of the men of the hour here, the main bad guy, Alphonse Big Boy Caprice, played by Al Pacino. And what I really like about Al Pacino's performance in this is that it's so understated and subtle.
I want them dead. Both of them. I want this no-face dead, and I want Tracy dead. What's the matter? You bums forgot how to kill people?
Yes, he's... I've never seen him so... He's basically like an inner monologue.
Yeah.
Doesn't your work mean anything to you anymore? Have you no sense of pride in what you do? No sense of duty? No sense of destiny?
Yeah, it's just so calm and reserved. You find yourself really having to lean in and turn up the volume to kind of catch his dialogue.
I'm looking for generals. What do I got? Foot soldiers. I want Dick Tracy dead.
Now, before we really hammer home Al Pacino, of course we're joking around. He's insane in this movie.
Yeah. An Academy Award nominated performance.
Yes. Yeah. Can I name more actors, please?
Yeah, of course.
We have Dick Van Dyke as D.A. Fletcher. We have Kathy Bates as Mrs. Green. We have James Caan as Spud Spaldoni. We have Catherine O'Hara as Texie Garcia. And then we have Mandy Patinkin as 88 Keys. Again, we have many more people, but those are just some of the names, right? But also, Trev, who's our main leading lady in this? It's fucking Madonna.
Yeah.
Madonna plays Breathless Mahoney in this, the seductive temptress of Dick Tracy in the film. And she is awesome. Not only is she incredibly sexy, obviously. This is Madonna at the height of her powers here. But there's a sadness behind her eyes that... You want Tracy to save her from this life of servitude, and you're rooting for him to save her because yes, she's seductive and she wants to maybe take Dick Tracy away from his longtime girlfriend, But Dick Tracy's not going to cheat. You just inherently know he's too good. He's too, as people have criticized the movie, he's too one note, which I will vehemently disagree about that. But he's too good, but he's going to save this girl. That's kind of he's going to do all he can to save this girl and get her out. I thought Madonna was really, really good in this.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of the forgotten elements of Madonna today that, everyone knows Madonna as like the musical performer, but she had a fairly decent like acting career as well. She's pretty good in a number of movies, like obviously Evita, people remember, but also you think about like Desperately Seeking Susan and things like that. It's like she was a good actress. Yeah. And she just didn't really ever pursue that as much as she pursued her music. And of course she was also, it should be said, one of the main reasons she's in this movie is she was dating Warren Beatty at the time, because it was her turn, essentially. For those for some of, for our younger listeners, let's take a second here and talk about Warren Beatty, right? Okay. Because we'll get back to Madonna. Because we should and then back to Al Pacino. we got a lot of buttons here, but what I'm alluding to, of course, is Warren Beatty is not just known as a great actor, a fantastic director, but honestly, one of the things Warren Beatty was most known for back in the day was just being like one of the great cocksmiths of Hollywood, essentially just plowing his way through every famous woman in Hollywood, in his 20s, 30s, 40s, into his 50s. Some of the names he's been romantically involved with, and I guess some of these are allegedly, but I think it's pretty safe to say it's probably true. Julie Christie, Brigitte Bardot, as we said, Madonna, Cher, Jane Fonda, Catherine Deneuve, Barbara Streisand, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, Goldie Hawn, Britt Eklund, Natalie Wood. So he and that's just a handful. I've seen estimates.
It's more than a handful, obviously.
Well, not for him, I don't think. I've seen estimates of he slept up to 1,000 women or whatever. Probably. Yeah. I read like a book called Hollywood Hellraisers about some of the craziest actors at that time. It was Dennis Hopper. Marlon Brando, Beatty being one of them. And basically every chapter about Beatty was just about him getting into a new relationship with some woman. Yeah. So that's why he made so few movies, because really he just didn't have the time with all the sex he was having.
Well, also a man known for his sexual promiscuity, being infatuated with Dick Tracy. It really does work. He was born for this role in this project.
But him and Madonna were a thing at this point. There was a lot. I remember too. There was a lot of stuff in the news about the age difference, which is funny because that's just so common in Hollywood now. Sure. Those kind of age differences. But yeah, he brought Madonna over, and not only does she give a good performance, she also provides a soundtrack. Another Batman comparison. Of course, Batman had the Prince soundtrack, and here we have a full Madonna album that's essentially the Dick Tracy soundtrack. And we should also mention the other thing we talk about Warren Beatty being so a control freak involved in every element of his movies. He doesn't get just anybody to write the songs for Madonna in this movie. No. He says, if I'm going to have songs in my movie, I'll get Stephen Sondheim to write them. So he's one of the great songwriters of all time as well. I just wanted people to know about Warren Beatty's history in that regard, because he's led quite the life.
Big time. Okay, Al Pacino.
Yeah.
This man screams his entire performance.
I say, you get behind me, we all profit. You challenge me, we all go down. There was one Napoleon, one Washington, one me.
He is so unhinged. There's so many memes and GIFs that I've seen over the years about Al Pacino, and I never see this movie. Why? Why not? This is Pacino to the fucking nth degree. Is it because he's caked in makeup? Is that the reason why? Is it because he's like this weird hunchbacked little mobster? I don't understand why did it take until 2023 for me to embrace everything that Big Boy Caprice is?
Yeah, it's strange because I think looking at his filmography, this is really the beginning of him transitioning into that period of his career where he just becomes known as the yelling guy, right? And that's his thing for a long time throughout the 90s and into the 2000s. And And it basically does start with Dick Tracy, and I was wondering why that one doesn't get as much attention for that as, Scent of a Woman or Heat or The Devil's Advocate.
Right.
And I think it might be because Dick Tracy is the one movie there, or maybe Devil's Advocate a little bit too, but especially Dick Tracy, where it does seem like what he's doing is like speaking to the movie's tone. Like the movie is so over the top and ridiculous that it makes sense for him to be this ridiculous. Then you look at him, then he starts playing that kind of energy. He starts bringing that energy to like dramas, and you're like, well, what are you doing, Al? Calm down a little bit,
Yeah.
But he's just having such a blast here. And I've seen people like criticize the Oscar nomination for him for this. Forget that, man. He rules in this. And this is exactly the kind of like big swing that I think the Oscars should be rewarding. He didn't win, but I totally agree with that nomination. I just think it's such a fun villain performance.
I love when he's giving little monologues here and there. He's always commenting on like what's happening, and then he like subtly makes like he kind of mumbles out like a quote from like a president or like a famous philosopher or something, and he always credits them though, which is my favorite part.
The way I see it, and Plato agrees with me, is that there is what is, and then there is what we would like it to be. Well, that's not important. What's important is the future. It's planning ahead. A man without a plan is not a man. Nietzsche. Wait a minute. Wait. I'm having a thought. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I'm gonna have a thought. It's coming. It's gone.
I love that he never stops talking. That's what I love about him. Like in the third act, there's the whole part where he's kidnapped Tess Trueheart, and he's like walking her, like running her through the city, and he just like never shuts up. This is like running commentary. There's another part earlier in the film where once he takes over Lips Manless's club and he's putting himself in charge, then he kind of inherits a Breathless Mahoney as the nightclub act, and he's watching her and her girls like practice their number, and he's giving them advice and coming in, and he's just like, he just won't shut up, right? And he's just like, he's joining in on the song. He has all these like mean comments about them. It's just consistently hilarious. He's definitely the all-star of this movie. I think he's the MVP here.
Yes, I agree. And that's not to take away from Warren Beatty. As I said before, I've seen criticism that Warren Beatty was too old for the role. I don't agree with that either. I mean,
no,
it's necessary to have a guy that knows what the fuck he's doing. He needs to know. I need to watch a movie that jumps right in. And guess what, Trev? We don't get movies like that anymore, especially the first outing for a comic book hero. We got to get an origin, not with Dick Tracy, 1990. We're thrown into this world. And Dick Tracy has a reputation in the city already. We know who he's going after. People know his name. They're fearful of him. We need a guy that is a little, I don't even want to say grizzled, because Warren Beatty's not even really grizzled in this. He's just a little older than 25-year-old, Tom Holland. You know what I mean? It's like he's aged, but I think it's so appropriate for the subject matter.
Yeah, and where I also want to give Warren Beatty credit on this, because I really like this performance too, and I think beyond the age, I've also just seen one of the typical criticisms you'll see of this movie is that, all the characters are interesting except for Dick Tracy.
Right.
Dick Tracy's boring. Dick Tracy's not interesting. And that's just so, first of all, I don't think it's true. I think Dick Tracy is pretty interesting. But also, there's something really admirable about Warren Beatty as the writer and director of this film, knowing that the show is going to get stolen by all the villains, all the over-the-top characters, and saying, that's fine. I'm still going to underplay Tracy. I'm going to play Tracy as like the normal kind of person in this movie, and I'm not going to try and be like the over-the-top flashy version. So I think that's actually pretty admirable, but I also think there's some moments in this, like Warren Beatty brings like a really kind of slight but deft comic timing to this part.
So what do? Grab 88 keys? Go straight for Big Boy.
Yeah, Tracy, what do? Grab 88 keys or go straight for Big Boy?
The enemy of my enemy, my friend? Or the enemy of my friend, my enemy?
What?
Or the enemy of my enemy, my enemy?
What did he say?
The enemy of my enemy is my enemy.
He said the enemy of his enemy is his enemy.
Yes.
I think he's actually very, very funny in like some of his reactions and just some of his like deadpan delivery and how he reacts to things, particularly in moments like when Tess Trueheart will walk in on him in Breathless, and just like the way he plays those moments, it's very, very funny. And he just knows how to hit it without, he doesn't have to bring himself to the Pacino energy levels. No. He's doing something different, but it's not bad. It's not disinteresting. And it's actually the perfect center for the movie because everything else is so big. I think if Dick Tracy himself was pitched to the same level as the villains, the movie might actually start to become a little aggravating.
Yes, exactly.
I think you need Dick Tracy at the center to like ground everything else.
And his understated performance works so well later in the movie where, spoilers, Tess Trueheart breaks up with him and says she's leaving him because she can't take that he's always working. You know, because again, he's our superhero, right? When duty calls, he runs. And she wants to settle down. She wants to, be together. She wants to be married. And Tracy just can't not be awesome and go do his job, right? So when Tess leaves him, Warren Beatty's so good when this happens too, because he's such a movie star. There's moments in here where he's getting a little bit hyped up, a little elevated, a little bit more angry than we've seen. And to the viewer, you're like, oh man, he's sad, right? He's sad that Tess is gone. And he doesn't know when he's going to see her again. And even when you have that feeling, the characters start to commentate on that, right? Like the kid starts to say, oh, you got to settle down. Hey, like take it easy. We know you're going through some stuff. And I love that. And that can only happen if he's understated the whole time. Yep. Right? So when it happens so marginally, and oh man, it's so good. I got goosebumps right now. I loved that performance in the middle of the movie when he's just like, he's sad, but he's still got to work. He's still got to work.
Yeah, and you know what to me proves that Warren Beatty is a great actor? I mean, besides his decades of great work. If we're just talking about this movie.
Are you gonna finally come to the defense of mega movie star, classic Hollywood Warren Beatty?
Yeah, but you know what? Let me tell you why Warren Beatty's good, folks. No, but I think one of the hardest kind of characters to play is actually decent and incorruptible. Mm-hmm. I think that's like a really tough, it's really tough to play that and not seem annoying or like sappy or make the audience roll their eyes. But I think to the point I want to make here is I think it's really, really impressive that Warren Beatty can play that so well, because Warren Beatty's real life persona often did get in the way of his career. And people always saw Warren Beatty as a cad. Right, we all knew going into any movie. Oh, Warren Beatty, that's the guy that like sleeps with everyone. Who right. And also he's the guy that is like hard to work with, and people get frustrated working with him and walk off the sets, and annoyed and angry about having to deal with him. And then the minute this movie starts, none of that matters. You don't bring any of that baggage with you because he just can instantly. You see Dick Tracy, you see the way Beatty plays, and you go, that is the most decent, good person in the world. None of like the Warren Beatty persona comes into this movie. It's all just Dick Tracy on screen. And I don't think that's always true. I think certain actors, their real life persona always overwhelms their work. It's like, it's hard to detach that. And I think that's a testament to his abilities too, where you said it's like real movie star shit. Like he knows how to direct it. And he knows how to play to the screen the right way.
Yeah. And to overcome that on-set persona, real life persona, it is an art form in itself. I mean, not to say that things are good to be that way either. That's not what I'm saying as well. But, there was a story here. Glenn Headley played Tess Trueheart in the film, but she wasn't the first choice. Allegedly, Sean Young from Blade Runner fame claims she was forced out of the role of Tess Trueheart after rebuffing sexual advances from Beatty. In a 1989 statement, Beatty said, "I made a mistake casting Sean Young in the part, and I felt very badly about it." That's all he had to say. And I know that's an allegation, but knowing Warren Beatty's real life philandering, he made a pass. Made a pass. Don't sue us, Beatty.
Yeah, I know. And here's the thing. That said, Glenn Headley is like much better in that role than Sean Young would have been.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like I like Sean Young, but I think Sean Young, I don't know that I could see Sean Young playing Tess, because Tess has to equal Dick Tracy's like goodness and decency, and Sean Young always has like that little bit of an edge to her as well. I really like Glenn Headley as a performer. She was in like a lot of like movies in the 90s. She was just kind of always one of like, oh, it's her, cool, like never a huge star. Right. She was like in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels and Mr. Holland's Opus, Mom and Dad Save the World. Movies that were just on all the time when I was younger, and I liked. Unfortunately, we lost her in 2017. She passed away, but I think she's really good in this as well, because that's the kind of, again, you look at like the other female lead is Madonna playing Breathless Mahoney, like the ultimate sex pot, and Glenn Headley has to be like, okay, I'll play like the more boring girlfriend, but but that role, that's a really tricky role too, because she has to make the audience fall in love with her and want him not to betray her. You know, we can't want him to jump over to Breathless, and we don't. I think we really root for Tess and Dick in this.
Yeah, we want Tracy to get back with her, right? And I mean, can I spoil some ending stuff here? Like, if you've listened this far, listener, and heard our exuberant comments on how much we liked it / loved it, go watch the movie. And then come back. Because here, I got to talk about the end scene, which I loved so much. The final scene of the film has Tess, Dick, and the kid sitting at a diner, reminiscing about what's going on. And Dick Tracy wants to ask Tess to marry him, but he just can't get it out. He's too serious. He's too masculine about it. He can't bring himself to say the words. He's like, when a lonely person wants somebody around, maybe, blah, blah. And he can't get it out. And the way Tess looks at him and is like, just say it. And then he looks over at the cook at the diner, and the diner's like, just fucking say it. Like, I love that. Still doesn't say it because his wristwatch goes off. And he's got to go. He's got to go to action, right? It's like the Spider-Man 2 ending, when Peter is kissing Mary Jane, and then he hears it on the radio that he's got to go save the day, and Mary Jane's like, go get him, Tiger. It felt like that kind of moment. And then Dick Tracy gets up, puts his trench coat on, and just throws an engagement ring at Tess. And I fucking love that. I was like, it was such an awesome way to leave the movie of just like, I'm going to go do this. You're my girl. We're going to get married, but this is what I got to do all the time. And it was such an awesome, like, just superhero moment. And I wanted more. I wanted more. It leaves you wanting
more.
Funny.
It's funny because for this viewing, I did watch this with my girlfriend, and she said at that moment, "Worst proposal ever." And it's like,
yeah. Oh, I bet.
Yeah, and it's like, yes, that's true, but it's also like that's all you're gonna get from Dick Tracy. And like you said, Glenn Headley plays that as like Tess gets it, and she's in love with him. She knows he loves her. She understands that he has a hard time with this, right? That's the best he can do because he just doesn't know how to. He doesn't know how to be romantic in that way. Totally. But for him, the romantic element of him is that he'll always come back to her. That'll always be like his home will always be Tess Trueheart.
We've talked a lot about performances. It's what I love about our little review here is that we haven't focused on the visuals to start. Because that's all that everybody wants to talk about. And I think now I actually do want to talk about the visuals a little bit more. We've talked about the pop art feel. We've talked about the matte paintings. You probably noticed this, but Avatar heads, Na'vi heads as I like to call us, probably noticed a little name of John Landau being one of the producers of the film.
Yep.
He is James Cameron's number 2 for the last 20 years. He seems to be the only guy that can tell James what to do, but also have just an incredible collaborative partnership together. So it was cool seeing John Landau have, starts of a visionary film like this, before the Avatar films. Anyways, the cool thing about this film is that Warren Beatty decided to make this film using a palette limited to just 7 colors.
Yep.
Primarily red, green, blue, and yellow to evoke the strip's, original artistry. And I find that so fascinating because, of course, as we've said, Warren Beatty is a little bit of a control freak. I do not doubt at all that he was fucking harsh on this because it shows. Vittorio Storaro, who Beatty had worked with on previous film Ishtar, and Reds. He's his cinematographer. He is quoted saying here that the limited color palette was the most challenging aspect of production. These are not the kind of colors the audience is used to seeing. These are much more dramatic in strength, in saturation. Comic strip art is usually done with very simple and primitive ideas and emotions. One of the elements is that the story is usually told in vignette, so what we try to do is never move the camera at all. Never. Try to make everything work into the frame. That's cool. Love that quote. Also, this is one of the last major American films to not use any CGI. I love that. I love it. Like I said, I love a matte painting. I love all that shit. We've talked about this earlier in many episodes, especially one of our first, Super Mario Brothers. That's not a great movie, but classic Hollywood filmmaking where you feel like you're on a set, you feel like they're props, you feel like everybody's dressed up in costumes, and everybody's taking it seriously. I fucking love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, Vittorio Storaro, the DP, he's pretty good, that guy. You know, he was the DP on a little something called Apocalypse Now. Heard of it? I worked with Francis Ford Coppola twice, but like Apocalypse Now, obviously the one where you just think like, dude, that guy survived making Apocalypse Now. Yeah. That's probably the only experience where you can be like, after that, working with Warren Beatty was probably like, man, whatever. You know, so,
yeah, I'll make your 7 colors. Fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the movie's just gorgeous. That's the thing. Like, even if for whatever reason you were bored by the story or you weren't into like the crazy characters, like which to me would still be like, I'd be like, huh? But like, it's just constantly a feast for the eyes. It's just such a beautiful movie to look at. Like, and like you said, even the sets, like some of the sets don't look real necessarily. Mm-hmm. A lot of it looks like, kind of like when you go to like Disney World or you go to like MGM Studios, you get to like walk through like, you know, like facsimiles of cities and stuff. A lot of the movie looks like that, but again, that adds to the heightened reality of it, where it feels like it exists in its own little world. It really does feel like a comic strip come to life.
It's so focused on visual storytelling, right? Like you got lots of montages, which I think totally worked.
You know what's funny about the montages is I was thinking about like just as a little aside on that, because I'm as someone who's watched this movie multiple times, right? I was thinking about the fact that there are like I think like 3 really significant montages in the movie where they kind of cover like a lot of time passing through montage. And I was thinking about how we know that this movie went way over budget and over schedule, and Warren Beatty's like a control freak and it was out of control. And I was just thinking like, oh, I wonder where some of that might have happened. And I noticed, so this is just me, my brain working at like, you know, as I watch these movies and think about what I know pop culture wise. One of the montages is showing a bunch of like radio announcers talking into their mics, like ostensibly like giving like the news of what's happening at the time.
Right.
And one of them in a montage, I was like, oh, I recognize that guy. It's the Micro Machine guy. I can't remember the actor's name, but he did all the commercials for Micro Machines back in the 90s, and his whole thing was he talks really fast. Like that's his whole thing. Like he talks really fast like this, but he can perfectly say what he's saying.
Right.
And he's one of the announcers, but you don't hear anything he says. You just see him in a montage. And I'm like, oh, there's no way that he wasn't brought in because he can do that. And so then I realized, oh, they filmed like all those guys. I wonder if that was going to be like a running thing through the movie where every once in a while you cut to like radio announcers delivering exposition.
Right.
And at a certain point, Beatty was like, oh, we don't need that. So like, let's just take all those shots and put them into a montage. So I just thought that was interesting because like that kind of clicked with me this time watching it. Just because that guy was in that montage, I was like, oh, I can see where this was just something like Beatty probably came up with after the fact in the editing room.
Well, totally, because I was really reminded of Speed Racer, right? Because so many times in Speed Racer, it relies on announcers explaining the plot, right?
Yeah.
And that movie does balloon to a 2-hour and 20-minute runtime, I believe. So it is quite a big movie. This one, Dick Tracy, is only like 105 minutes, I think. It is edited to an inch of its life for good reasons. I love it. Like there's really no fat to it, and a movie like this, where you have a intricate mobster plot, you know, and the hero's got to figure out what's going on, and there's maybe double crosses and this and that and that. Movies nowadays that tackle that, we've talked about a few of them in this podcast, but they are so wrapped up in their plot that it just becomes exposition dumps. And this movie definitely handles it by just making it visual. Right?
Yeah.
Like we don't need those guys as cool as that is. We don't need those guys talking to us in the camera. We can just show it happening through a couple of montages and vignettes. It just totally works. It just really works for me.
Yeah, like the only thing I felt like watching it this time that was like a little bit of a sticking point for me in like the storytelling and going, I wonder if this is because it's cut down or edited, whatever. And I don't know if you felt this way too, Chris. If I had to poke any kind of hole in the plot at all, there is a plot point in the movie where one of the ways the bad guys decide to get rid of Tracy is to frame him for the murder of the DA.
Right.
So he's like set up, and then he's like put in, they make it look like he killed the DA, and then he goes to jail. And you're like wondering, well, how's this going to get resolved? And it kind of never is. Like the other cops just like let him out.
Right, yeah.
And then the whole third act. And then you're thinking like that kind of puts like a weird funk over the third act, because you go like the minute they put him in the car, so allegedly to transfer him to like the other prison, and they go like, it's a long drive to the prison, probably take about 8 hours, just enough time to go get Big Boy. You're like, oh, well, these cops kind of are crooked now, aren't they? Like they're doing something corrupt by
but they just know Dick Tracy's so good.
I know,
They just
I know.
They know he's incorruptible.
It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's the only part of the movie where you can kind of sense like they were probably like, oh, we don't really know how we got Tracy into this situation. We don't know how to get him out. Screw it. They just let him out. Like, whatever. That's good enough.
But that
and then there's like almost like an ADR line at the end where you hear the kid go like, and then we got that guy to admit that he killed the DA, and it's like, oh, okay.
That did lead to one of my favorite scenes is capturing Mumbles again by Dustin Hoffman. Mumbles, earlier in the film, they interrogate him with a hot light on his face, and they force him that he wants some water. You want some water, and if you want some water, you got to tell me what to do, or you got to tell me what's going on and who killed Lips. And Dick Tracy drinks water in front of him, and then he mumbles stuff, right?
Yeah.
And
look out for a very, like in that scene, look out for a very early, entirely wordless performance from Kathy Bates as the stenographer, and a very funny, wordless performance. They have some cutaways to her that are very, very funny.
Because right away, Dick Tracy understands him, but nobody else does, and the stenographer doesn't know what to write down, right? So later in the film, he's released from jail by the crooked cops, apparently, and they go get Mumbles again, and they're going to interrogate him again, and he goes, you remember this, and grabs this big polar bear water fountain, the one he used in the interrogation, and he lifts the top of it, and it's actually a recording device as well. And basically, Tracy manipulates the film, like the audio film, for his mumbling to sound perfect. So you hear him say, "Big boy did it," which is then hilarious because Mumbles immediately drops mumbling at that point, which I thought was a great character beat. I really like that a lot. I can go on and on about a bunch of scenes that I loved, but one I really liked was the action of the shootout escape. Trev, you know I love explosions. I love me some explosions, okay? And the old-timey cars and Tommy guns is awesome, and there's this great shot that I'm so glad I didn't watch the trailer before watching this, because I'm assuming that probably is in the trailer, but there's this great shot of Warren Beatty dressed up as Dick Tracy, and it's this big wide shot too, so you can really see the space where he's standing, and he spins around to shoot flat top, and a car, at the moment he spins around, this big car behind him explodes, and it's all done for real. It is Warren Beatty standing there. It is perfect action and staging, and there's no CGI. It was such an incredible moment. That is classic movie making that is just lost now.
Yeah. Well, and you say, well, we know you love explosions. And Chris, what have I always told you since we first met? You know what I love is kids' movies that end with multiple people machine gunned to death. That's what
That is true. You've said that to me many, many times. It is funny.
It never fails to amaze me. I think I thought it not as much as a kid, maybe a little bit as a kid, but certainly every time I revisit as an adult, just go like, oh yeah, this was like kind of a kid's movie, because this movie has a lot of murder in it. And just like, a lot of, like I said, just the entire end, that big action sequence at the end where they're just like mowing down all the bad guys. Pretty amazing. And we should say that when Beatty finally turned this movie in, even Disney was like, oh, well, we can't put this out under the Disney label. So this came out as a Touchstone movie, because they're like, it's a little too adult to really call it a kid's movie. But it's funny because you kind of get the sense, what I mentioned earlier, like the marketing of it. By the time it came out, this movie was like the subject of such a huge merchandise blitz. There was just so many toys and so many things pitched specifically at kids that I just don't know if they were like caught unaware by the movie Beatty turned in. Probably, right? Because this is just Beatty doing his thing again. But I mean, it's not to say I think kids can watch this. You know, I think it's fine for kids, but it's definitely not the kind of kids movie that Disney usually trades in. It's got some adult stuff in it, particularly like all the sexual innuendo with Breathless and Dick Tracy as well. And there's a scene that, again, they probably never expected this movie to be in like an HD, streaming or Blu-rays.
I know what you're going to say.
But yeah, Madonna's see-through negligee at one point. You're like, oh, okay, that's in a Disney movie. That's kind of surprising.
Yeah, her nipples are very much there. That's for sure.
Yeah. And Chris, can I just give one last shout out? We've mentioned like a lot of the performances, like obviously Pacino being the MVP, Madonna being really good, Warren Beatty being much better than people give him credit for. But you know who else I want to shout out is Charlie Korsmo as the kid.
Yep.
Because you and I have talked a lot about how like kid actors usually suck. Like they're usually like, what sinks the movie. And the kid is a very big character in this, and I really like him. I always liked him as a kid. I liked him. I still like him in this. I think he's. I think it's a really fun performance. I love the montage of like the "When Can We Eat" montage with him. That's like maybe my favorite montage in the movie. But yeah, he never gets annoying. I'm on his side the whole time, which is not always the case with kids in movies.
Yeah, they usually make or break a movie. And this guy's good. He didn't have a huge career though. Hey, I know he's the kid in Hook, right?
I mean, if I was in Hook, I'd be so embarrassed I'd quit acting too.
I hate that movie too. Come at me, Hook fans.
Yeah,
as I like to call you, hookers. Yeah, no, he's really good in this. He stands toe to toe with Warren Beatty, and it feels real. Like it feels like there's this truly unspoken bond, because he's like the annoying little kid that Dick Tracy's like, well, I gotta, because of circumstance, I gotta take care of you. But, maybe I'll send you to the orphanage. But, I'm growing to like this kid because he kind of gives it back to me. You know what I mean? Like there's that sense. Also, the film, unknowingly at the time, sets up a legacy sequel. This movie never got sequels, which we're going to get to right away here, and the reasoning for that. But him, the kid taking Dick Tracy's name is a great moment, and it really, really works. And if they want to make a movie nowadays, it's pretty easy to do if you want to stay in the continuity. But I really like that moment. It worked for me. It really did.
Yeah. And Chris, really the only other thing I wanted to say about the movie itself is I just had a question for you, because we've talked a lot about like the movie so far and the performance and everything. Oddly enough, we haven't talked about one of the other main villains in the movie, the Blank. There's this like, I don't even want to call it a subplot. It's a pretty big part of the movie where another mysterious villain shows up in the city through the course of this film who has no face, and they're called the Blank. I don't even know if they were called the Blank in the movie, but that's what the toy was called, and that's how it's credited. But that's the mystery, right? Who is the Blank? Who is this like no face assassin that's seems to be working with Big Boy, but also seems to be kind of working against Big Boy, and it's like this mystery. I just want to ask you, as a astute viewer, was there ever a question in your mind of who the Blank was, or did you figure it out almost immediately? Just curious.
Actually, I actually was surprised by the ending of it, and you might make fun of me. And
no, because like my thing is like. I just want to say, like, I think I was, like, to me, I saw this movie as a kid, right? And as a kid, that totally got me. I always wondered what it would be like if I saw it later, but apparently it didn't get you, so, yeah.
Well, I have the mind of a 9-year-old, so there's that. But the reason why I think it works, and I actually don't want to spoil it right now, so, go watch the movie. But the reason why I think the twist works is the movie establishes such weird, gross prosthetics the whole movie. So you never, ever once question that, could this person be wearing a mask?
Yeah.
I just felt like the rules of the world. You love my rules. I love my rules about movies.
What are the rules?
And the rules of the film made it seem like somebody without a face could actually live in this world. So that's why I think the twist really works for me. I really do.
Yeah, what's funny about that is another thing I forgot to mention. I don't know if you saw this in any of your research, because it's something I remember reading years ago. But the Dick Tracy comic strip character has like this very prominent like side profile where it kind of like it almost goes right down from his forehead like immediately into his nose. It's like he has a very prominent like particular kind of nose. And I have heard that Warren Beatty did do makeup tests to like make himself look like the Dick Tracy from the comics, just like all the villains did.
Right.
And apparently, like people say it didn't look great. Really, I think that's probably just Warren Beatty being like, no, you don't cover up the moneymaker, right? Like I'm Warren Beatty. I'm going to be handsome ass Warren Beatty on screen. But again, I think it's the right decision, because I think it's a better idea to have the villains be the outlandish ones and have Dick Tracy look like Warren Beatty.
Yeah.
Although those pictures have never surfaced. I desperately want to see them, though. I do want to see Warren Beatty wearing the fake nose.
Do you think he has it under lock and key, like the rights to this film?
Why bother? Like, if Warren Beatty with a fake dumbass nose can still score way more than any of us can. So
that's true. That's true. The movie is awesome. Please go watch it. It's great. I am appalled and sorrowful that we did not get a sequel to this.
Yeah.
I would have absolutely loved to see more. And the reason why, Trev, we didn't get more is why. Please tell me. Please tell me why. Why does it seem that Warren Beatty is going to his grave with these rights?
Well, it's interesting because there's a couple, you could look at certain things like decisions he even made about, it's kind of interesting that he was pitching this as a franchise. I think after The Failure of Ishtar, he really wanted his own franchise.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to make this movie as a franchise opener and bring in almost every Dick Tracy villain and kill them all by the end of the movie. That was an interesting choice. So I just thought that was weird. But as we said, because of the financial element of it, Disney was in no hurry to do a sequel with him. There's been discussion because basically ever since Warren Beatty has constantly talked about doing a sequel. He's always said he wants to do one. He's been saying that for decades now. There's been other attempts and other discussions. I actually found a really interesting one, Chris. I don't know if you saw this, but so in the 1990s, Bruce Campbell actually had a brief development deal with Disney. Because he was working with them, and he was in the Herbie the Love Bug remake and things like one of the Herbie the Love Bug remakes, and he'd done some other stuff with Disney. And he had a brief development deal with Disney, which nothing came of it. He didn't end up doing anything for that development deal. But he has said that as part of the development deal, they brought him a bunch of IPs and put him in front of him and said, "Is there anything here you'd be interested in doing?" And the thing that Bruce Campbell pitched and really wanted to do is he wanted to do a Dick Tracy TV show.
Groovy.
And that didn't happen, and I really kind of mourn that because Bruce Campbell's even said, he's I think I really could have nailed a really good kind of witty, sarcastic version of Dick Tracy, and I'm oh yeah, Bruce Campbell would be a perfect Dick Tracy, especially for a TV version. That just in my head sounds we really missed out on something.
Totally.
But that didn't happen, and essentially the reason it didn't happen, and you see this with every time you look at a discussion about whoa, they almost did something here, they almost did something here, is because Warren Beatty has the rights. He has the cinematic rights and he won't get rid of them. And I don't know if that goes to TV, but I think Disney was just didn't even want to bother trying to get into any kind of legal battle with him or anything. So we're not going to get any sequel until either Warren Beatty decides to actually do it or until he passes away. And then even then, I don't know what's going to happen with the rights at that point. But
it feels like this Dick Tracy's in his will. This feels like this is going to me and my children. He has children with Annette Bening, right?
He does, yeah.
Yeah. So it feels like that way because you say, are the courts getting involved? Yeah, he does get involved all the time. There was even a TV show after the 90s that was being developed by Lorenzo di Bonaventura and Robert Newmeyer in the early 2000s. It was going to be more contemporary. It was going to be comparable to Smallville. Warren Beatty started to sue. And in August of 2005, the ruling by the federal judge said, yeah, you can sue Tribune Media on this TV venture. And that's why that crumbled as well. So I think people are just getting scared of him to sue. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, Beatty aired a broadcast called the Dick Tracy Special, where he hired Emmanuel Lubezki as the cinematographer. Dude was the director photographer of The Tree of Life, Gravity, Birdman, The Revenant. This guy shoots the hell out of everything. And he was hired to film Warren Beatty in character as Dick Tracy talking to film critic Leonard Maltin in a 30-minute television special where they sit opposite each other in a black room. And apparently that 30-minute special was deemed enough and sufficient for Warren Beatty to hold the rights to Dick Tracy. So
that one's weird enough. I mean, it should be said because we've been talking about Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty in the 2000s it's a very strange figure because essentially he goes into 2001 and makes a movie called Town and Country, which is just reviled. Everyone hates it. And that basically chases him away from acting and like Hollywood. He's like I'm just done. He retires. We already said he was already not the most prolific, but at that point he's just you know what, I think we're going to wrap it up. And he doesn't do anything until that Dick Tracy special in 2010. And since then he only has 2 additional credits. In 2016 he finally directs another movie and stars a movie called Rules Don't Apply, where he plays Howard Hughes, a movie that nobody saw and even less people liked. It's just really weird that he kind of came back for that. And then the story continues, Chris, because as strange as the 2010 Dick Tracy special is, it's more or less kind of harmless. You know, it's like a clever idea. It's kind of neat. You know, like, oh, Leonard Maltin interviews Warren Beatty in character as Dick Tracy. That's cute. You know, there's no defense for the next version of this, because as you and I were discussing Pulp Frustration and talking about doing this, our old buddy Warren Beatty roars back into the consciousness and into this discussion, because apparently the rights were about to come up again, and he says, "Oh, you know, maybe I'll do another one of those Dick Tracy specials." So just recently, just weeks ago, as we record this in 2023, he gives us the sequel to the Dick Tracy special, this time called Tracy Zooms In. And Chris, in preparation for this episode, I watched this entire half-hour special.
You took the bullet for the team. You did it for us. You did it for us.
I think my brain melted watching this. It is one of the most cringe, embarrassing, unforgivable things you'll ever see. So of course, like, it's fascinating. But the concept of this one is it's Leonard Maltin and Ben Mankiewicz, another critic, get together, and at first, like, the first part of it is them watching clips of the original Dick Tracy special, and basically, like, Tom Mankiewicz asking Leonard Maltin, like, "Why did you do this? That's so weird." And then Dick Tracy zooms in to talk to them, and it's once again Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy. And we should say Warren Beatty at this point is an 85-year-old man, and he looks to be an 85-year-old man. So it's an 85-year-old Warren Beatty dressed in the Dick Tracy hat and coat, and he zooms in to talk to Mankiewicz and Leonard Maltin, and proceeds to basically, like, shit talk the Warren Beatty Dick Tracy movie. Like, they show the trailer.
Really?
Yeah, they like show the trailer and have Dick Tracy respond to the trailer, and he just talks over the trailer, talking about, like, how dumb he thinks it looks.
Let me show you some stuff from the original trailer of the Beatty film.
I'm calling.
Hi, ma'am.
Well, little face.
I'll just pause it here for a second. Well, that's a very impressive makeup job, but I might have done it a little differently. And this is just not believable. Well, this is quite a beautiful shot, but my own feeling is that they're beautiful paintings. Perfectly nice. I mean, these are over the top. Well, I understand, you know, the suspension of disbelief, but yeah.
Pat, bring in Flat Top and Itchy. Sam, get these fingerprinted.
Flat Top and Itchy.
No, this is good. This is good. This is fine, and this is fine too. This is good and nice. That's good.
There's the phone.
That's no. Well, this is I don't even know what to say about this.
And then after that, the special gets even weirder, because then Warren Beatty also zooms in. So now on screen, you have 4 zoom windows, one being Ben Mankiewicz, one being Leonard Maltin, and then the other 2 being Warren Beatty and Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy. And Mankiewicz and Leonard Maltin just sit there with these dumbfounded looks on their face. They don't say anything. And they just watch as Warren Beatty and Dick Tracy, like, get in this, like, weird argument where Dick Tracy is, like, asking him why he never made another movie. And, like, Warren Beatty's like, "No, I was thinking about doing it." And then he's like, weren't we supposed to meet for lunch? He's like, "Oh, I didn't know," you know, and it's so awkward and so bizarre. And ultimately it culminates in this bizarre moment where Dick Tracy goes on, like, a rant about what a modern Dick Tracy movie, if made today, could possibly be.
You thinking about making a movie? I don't know what to think about making movies nowadays. Maybe another movie's a good idea. You know what? I think you've produced some really good movies. They were special. And you were quite good in them. But come on, in those movies, you never had yourself knocking out 7 guys with one punch like you did in the movie about me. I mean, come on, 7 guys with one punch? If I'd been collaborating with you, I would have fought you on that one. Do you think another movie about me could be a little more serious? Serious? Like how? Not so many pretty colors? Ah. You mean more real, huh? Treating crime like it's a serious subject. A little less like a painting or a musical comedy, you know? Maybe make the bad guys look more like real people. I mean, you didn't make me look unreal. Oh, by the way, I want to thank you for that. In fact, I think you look too good to play me. I don't look that good. Well, I think you look fine. We could argue about that. By the way, if you ever do make another movie, I think maybe it'd be good for you to have somebody you can argue with. You say you don't know what to think about making movies now. Well, that's because things have changed so fast. People want to watch movies at home and put them on pause so they can use their cell phone, so they can break for dinner, so they can go to the toilet, so they can treat movies like books, so they can look at them, put them down, pick them up later. They don't want to have to drive to a theater. They don't want to have to park their car. They want to look at whatever they like whenever they want to look at it. Yeah, sure, sometimes they'll take the trouble to go to a theater and see a movie on a big screen. Fine. But I say, if you're thinking about making another movie about me, do you think you might just make it a little more real? Not with pink and blue streets. Keep the musical comedy scenes, but only in nightclubs, not on pink and blue streets. And if you want the bad guys to be ugly, fine, but make them look real. And if you want to do another movie about me, you might want to have somebody you trust enough to argue with who actually knows about me. And would you think about maybe getting somebody a little younger than you to play me? But I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe I should be played old by somebody who's able to do things old people can't ordinarily do. And you know, maybe it's better as a series. That's how we started in 1931 in the funny papers. Hey, it'd take a lot of discussion. But there's a lot of things that take a lot of discussion. And as you said yourself to Ben in your interview, collaboration is key. It's mandatory. But to collaborate, you need somebody you can trust enough to argue with. You've got the final say. You own the rights.
And I guess my takeaway there was that kind of sounds like that's the closest like we've come to Warren Beatty really hinting at maybe he's getting ready to do something. But what I honestly think it is that my assumption is that's Warren Beatty realizing he's 85, realizing if he's going to do something, the time is probably of the essence. And him putting his feelers out and being like, well, here, I'll talk about what a Dick Tracy movie could be. And I wonder if anybody will contact me and say, hey, we want to finance it. You know what I mean? Like, that's the only thing I think that might be. But I think anybody with a lot of money, even if you had a lot of money to burn, would probably watch that special and go, oh, that is a crazy person. I am not going to, I am not going to get into business with that person to make another Dick Tracy movie. So yeah, I just think it's, I hate to say this is the sad thing. I just think, again, he's 85. He looks to be, you know, he's in good health. He's still got it. But because he so rarely does anything, there's this part of me now that has this like weird feeling that Warren Beatty's going to pass away, and the last thing he's going to have done, the last thing in his filmography is going to be Tracy Zooms In, the Dick Tracy Zoom special. And that's just so bizarre. But then again, it's almost kind of perfect because him holding on to these rights and like not letting anyone else take them, but not making another movie has been such a part of his story for the last 3 decades. So
yeah, like it's obviously something he holds near and dear. I mean, yeah. I haven't watched the special. I'm gonna be placing the clips that you just heard, listener. So I haven't heard them yet. But Trev, like, I know he sounds like a rambling of a senile individual, probably. But like, does his pitch sound like at all promising? Like.
It's weird because it's really like it's kind of like Dick Tracy going on about how, you know, how the landscape is changing, how now people want stuff streaming and things like that.
Right.
But honestly, what kind of bothered me about what he says, and again, maybe this is just an old guy like thinking that, you know, thinking about how the original movie wasn't the huge hit he wanted it to be and trying to figure out what his place in the landscape is now. What he pitches is basically the Dick Tracy movie we both said we don't necessarily want, saying like maybe if I made a Dick Tracy movie now, it would be darker and more serious, and it wouldn't be colorful. It wouldn't be the comic book one. And I'm just thinking like, no. Like we want, if you're going to do Dick Tracy again, like we want the movie you did before. You know, I want Dick Tracy to always be this like colorful, campy, outrageous, earnest, but silly kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I don't expect it to happen. I don't think we're ever going to get another Warren Beatty Dick Tracy movie. I'm more curious to see what happens after after he passes away with those rights. And really the question is there anyone else out there who's even like, is anyone begrudging the fact that he has those rights? You know, we've said like some TV shows have tried to happen, but are there a lot of people out there who are like, man, I really want to make a Dick Tracy movie? You know, you think about the Dick Tracy movie that we just talked about, and there's all these big stars in it, but you realize those are all stars who grew up while the comic strip was running, you know? Warren Beatty said he learned to read from that comic strip. You know, the reason I'm sure Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, James Caan, Paul Sorvino, the reason they were willing to be in a movie like that, even caked under silly makeup. Well, James Caan did not do makeup, I noticed. Did you notice that in the movie? Like,
he had like barely in the side of his mouth, I think he had, and that was about it.
That scene, I was like, James Caan was probably like, I ain't doing that shit.
Totally.
But I'm sure all those guys grew up watching like the original like Dick Tracy TV shows, reading the comic, watching the movies. But that's not the case today, you know. So I don't know that there's like a big call for it. But yeah,
I think also these wild swings just fail all the time. Like it sucks to say, but this is an anomaly of a film. It came out at the perfect time for the perfect reasons, and it was like it's lightning in a bottle. It did marginally well without knowing exactly how much they spent on it. Critically, like you said, was pretty positive. Hey, people like me and you really, really enjoy it. I mean, that's good and all, but these wild swings don't work. Like again, it's the Speed Racer episode all over again, right? It's something that is so inherently visionary. It is made by people that have something to I don't know about say, maybe that's not the word I want to use, but it's definitely creative, it's out of the box, it's vibrant, it's earnest, it has a crazy good cast. But this modern landscape we live in just never retains it. You know what I mean? Like again, I will always question why Speed Racer didn't work. Mm-hmm. Why did that movie not make $1 billion? I think Hollywood is scared of doing that now. You know, they see the Dark Knights of the world, and that's the way we do things now. And some things have broken through marginally, but then we return back. Look at what's going on with the MCU right now. It took some swings, and then it's come back to just being dome-filled spectacles, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I don't know if this has a place in 2023 and beyond. I think we're getting dumber. I mean, I hate to say, I'll just say it like that. We're getting fucking dumb. And
I have to. Oh, go ahead.
So no, I'm just saying, like, just film fans like me and you will appreciate this movie. But I bet if I throw this in front of my parents or the regular moviegoer, it's not gonna work. They're going to take one look at Flat Top and be like, what the fuck am I watching? Or they're going to watch Al Pacino scream at the camera for 90 minutes and they're going to be annoyed. There's something to say about film people. I don't want to sound so, part of an elite fucking ivory tower club here. But film fans, I think, would like this. They can appreciate it. But now I think it's lost on the modern moviegoer.
Well, that's one of the points I want to make with the movie, because this is kind of similar to Speed Racer as well, like in terms of not just the visual aspect, but let's talk about that. Like, whenever I'm trying to like get people interested in Dick Tracy, like obviously the selling point you will lead with is like, oh, it looks so cool. It doesn't look like anything else you've seen. And obviously you'd be like, oh, and it's got all these big actors. Like the selling points to get someone who might not be interested to sit down and maybe give it a chance are, oh, it's got this really distinctive visual style and it's full of big actors, right? And sometimes when people might think like, oh, well, so it's not that good of a movie, but you're telling me that it looks cool and it's just got actors giving crazy performances.
Sure.
But what's like really important that I think you and I are trying to get across is that what doesn't get talked about enough with Dick Tracy is it actually is a good movie too, like beyond those elements.
Yeah.
Like, yes, it's true that it like looks amazing and it has Al Pacino in this like ridiculous performance and has all these all-stars playing these weird mutant criminals, and it's got one of the biggest stars of its era in the lead role. But as you said, like the story also just works. It's this like really simple, fun detective story. And yeah, I think if more people give it a shot today, I think it might go over well. I do think a problem with any like modern Dick Tracy movie that would be made is there's no way we would get one like this. Like a Dick Tracy movie today, they would definitely be thinking about a franchise, and it's the kind of movie that would be committed to death. There's no way they would let a singular voice just go nuts and like put their foot down and make the movie they want to make. And that's what Warren Beatty did. And that's why I, like I said, as a kid, I just loved it because it was a fun, colorful comic book movie. Today I love it for all that reason, but also because it's this guy who's just said, like, I bought the rights to this character. Forget everyone else. I'm making the movie I want to make. I'm not making a movie that even fits. Like, this wasn't the trend of the time. You know, nobody else was making movies that felt like this at the time. He's like, I don't care. I'm just making the Dick Tracy movie I've envisioned in my head since I was a boy. And I think that rules.
Yeah. I can't say it better than you have. So,
and can I just throw out one quick recommendation that feeds into this too?
Sure.
Because you mentioned that this movie is not an origin story, and that's true, and that's one of its great strengths. But I do want to say, for anybody like us who checks out the movie and is disappointed that it never had any sequels and does want to spend just a little bit more time in this world, let me recommend, there's actually a great graphic novel. It's long out of print, but you can find it usually really cheap on like eBay or people selling used copies on Amazon. When this movie came out, Walt Disney Publications put out a 3-volume comic book, and it's been collected in one trade collection called Dick Tracy, True Hearts, and Tommy Guns. It's written by John Moore and illustrated by the great Kyle Baker, who's like a really like awesome kind of with like a very exaggerated cartoonish style penciler. Like hardcore indie comic fans will probably know Kyle Baker. But the thing about this 3-volume story is that the first 2 volumes are actually prequels, and then the third volume is an adaptation of the movie. The third volume, which is the adaptation, is fine, whatever. You know, it's just reading the movie again as a comic book. But those first 2 volumes actually like tell the whole story leading up to that, and it's really good. It's like really well done, and it covers a lot of territory. It shows you like Dick Tracy's rise through the ranks to like up to detective, as like a beat cop up to detective. Then you're also watching Breathless Mahoney arrive in the city and like trying to find her place in the world and how she ends up working at Lips's club. It's following the rise of Big Boy Caprice. Like throughout these 2 volumes, he's actually like one of Lipman's like just underlings, like working with Itchy and Flat Top, and it's showing why he starts to try and decide to take over. And it leads you right up to like, you know, because you said the movie just starts in media res, but the end of the second volume takes you like right up to that moment, and you get to get like all the backstories of all these characters and see how they got there. And I really like it. I own it. I've read it multiple times. I kind of still come back to it. Yeah, if you can find it cheap, definitely pick it up.
Cool.
And like one thing I think is very, very funny about it, I remember reading this back in the day, but Kyle Baker has this like I'll post some pictures of it actually, some stills from it on our social media. Kyle Baker has this very distinctive, very exaggerated style, and every character is drawn that way except Dick Tracy. Like Dick Tracy is always drawn, like the face is definitely made to look very, very photorealistic to Warren Beatty.
Oh yeah.
and I actually heard that when Kyle Baker drew it, he drew Dick Tracy in the comic to look like the comic strip Dick Tracy, like to match all the other characters. And I've heard that Warren Beatty saw that actually and said, no, it needs to look like me. And apparently, from what I understand, it's like every panel in that they had to go back and like digitally change it to where it like looks more like Warren Beatty. So that's one also funny thing about the comic. But
the True Passion Project, right? Like
he's got a little. He's his own True Passion project as well. So
yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Lifetime hard on for Dick.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wraps up Dick Tracy 1990. Keep on with us with Pulp Frustration, because next time we're going to be looking at The Rocketeer from 1991, then The Shadow from 1994, and then The Phantom from 1996. Some more movies I've never seen. So hopefully big surprises for me. I believe actually I don't know if Trev's seen all 3. I mean, I assume Trev sees them. He watches a bunch of junk.
But I can confirm I've seen all 3. I won't talk about things.
Okay, fair enough. So yes, follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Then just rate, review, whatever you do. Star rating would be awesome on whatever platform you're listening to us. And then just join the tribe, hit that subscribe, and keep on with us amongst this Pulp Frustration. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. And Chris, as we head on out, let's of course give one final shout out to Dick Tracy, and of course the one iconic character we didn't talk about, Cop at Tess's, the beat cop who walks up and I believe just says one line in the movie. Of course, played by Cole Meany, who fans will know as Miles O'Brien from Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek: Deep Space Nine.
Okay, I'm not showing up to the Rocketeer episode.
Damn it.
See ya.
Yeah.